Welcome to the podcast. I am your host, as always, Alfred Tabax, joined, as always, I said that twice, but by Andy Spiteri.
Hey, everybody.
Yeah.
How are you?
So, this week, we're going to talk about some stuff. I'm being very descriptive there. One of the first things I wanted to hit on was some of the DLC information that we got for Breath of the Wild, the Champions Ballad. So, we got two, major pieces of information. And this happened at the Zelda Masterclass at the Japan Expo. So the first one was that we're still playing as Link. I know a lot of people thought maybe we get to play as Zelda this time, or maybe we get to play as one of the heroes or champions, but you're still Link. And then second is that the story will take place after Ganon's defeat. So this is post everything that happened in the original game, or the first part of the game, I guess. So this is kind of a sequel. I'd view it more along the lines of an epilogue, I guess.
Super surprising.
Classified, yeah. I mean, I didn't think that they were necessarily going to do something like a completely different story. But I could see why they're doing it, kind of. I mean, they talked, or I think it was Aonuma talked about how if they were going to do a sequel, it's pretty far off in the future, and they're not really looking at that right now. So I guess that this is the sequel to Breath of the Wild in a way.
I just think it's surprising because all signs are kind of pointed towards the DLC taking place in the past, like 100 years prior, which I would still kind of argue that all signs are pointing to that happening anyways, at least in terms of flashbacks, like somewhere along the line. But I was kind of surprised because it sounds like it's going to be an epilogue, but then like the fact that they're making amiibo of the champions, the original 4 champions, would lead you to believe that they have a pretty prominent part in this.
Yeah, that's where I'm confused.
Mm-hmm. But obviously they can't have a prominent part if they've already been, spoilers, killed. So,
well, but you get to the point too, because there's the confusing thing is that in the trailer, I guess the short trailer about it, Zelda goes to meet Riju, the new head of the Gerudo
princess.
Yeah. And so that indicates that this is during, this current timeline or this current time as opposed to in the past, because Urbosa was in charge of it way back when. So you run into that issue if you want to say that it's going to take place in the past of, okay, well, why is Riju in charge of the Gerudo right now? Mm-hmm. And so it's a little confusing, I guess. Like you were saying, though, the weird thing is that the champions are going to be at the forefront of this. Obviously, by the name and the fact that we're getting 4 amiibo based off of them, it kind of leaves you wondering, okay, so why are they being featured so prominently if this is taking place after the entire game? Unless what you're saying is if they're doing flashbacks. Like
my speculation would be, to anyone that's ever seen an episode of Lost or Orange is the New Black, I think that they're going to kind of follow that formula where the story takes present in the future, but it'll pan back to flashbacks at certain moments that revolve around certain characters. So I think that would make sense to have maybe the story, if it was focusing on Riju a little bit in the present, flash backwards to see maybe how Urbosa became such an awesome warrior, how she got into the champions or something like that. I would suspect that you're going to kind of see how the original 4 champions got together, and then at the end of this DLC, you're going to see their descendants kind of come together as well to form a new band of champions. Because they never really did that. They all helped out Link during the adventure, but they never had that awesome shot of the new champions. I wrote something that's coming out on Monday that kind of alluded to this, but they never had that sweet Avengers shot of all the new champions teaming up or whatever. So if I had to guess, I think we're going to get something kind of like that in this DLC.
Yeah, I could see that. It's where Zelda's well, Ganon could come back at any point, so we need more champions or whatever to operate the beasts or the divine beasts. So. Which is a little confusing because technically, if you want to think about it, the spirits of the champions still haven't passed on. It's what it is. But yeah, we don't really, again, have a lot of information on it. It's coming out later on this year, soon-ish, I guess. So look forward to it because we are. It's some more story content for Breath of the Wild. So that's always exciting.
Mm-hmm. And I'm interested to see if the dungeon will follow the same mechanics too. Because obviously there's not a fifth divine beast unless there is.
Yeah.
Kicking around. So what I was kind of hoping was like a dungeon that really kind of focused on all the champions' different strengths and stuff. Like if you needed to use Rivali's Gale or if you needed to use Druk's Protection or anything like that to get past certain segments in the dungeon. I'm not exactly sure how that would work, but
that's an interesting thing because the way that they built the game is in such a way that you could go the whole game without ever having any of those things.
Mm-hmm.
So like you could go throughout the whole game and never have Rivali's Gale. And you're kind of stuck if they make a dungeon like that, unless
or even if the DLC introduces like a couple items that you can pick up that would give you something like akin to basically like something that represented each one of the champions and was vital in defeating that other dungeon. I think would be kind of cool, and that would probably probably appease a lot of the people that were kind of down on Breath of the Wild's dungeons too. Because that sounds like a little bit more of a traditional setup for a dungeon.
Unless what they go along with, and this is something else that I could see, is if it's a completely new file, I guess, where you have all of the items or you have everything you need to go about it, which would kind of suck because you've the link that I have is going to be different than the link that's going to be in whatever canon, I guess. Like with the armor that I'm wearing, whatever I have on as Link is not going to be what somebody else has on as Link. So it would kind of suck to have that reset. But that's the only way that I could see them doing it in such a way that everybody's at a level playing field with this. Unless whatever dungeon it is, and that was I guess the problem that they ran into with making it so open world that there was no linearity to it at all. Is that you hit that road bump of, okay, well, the dungeons can't build on each other because
you can do them in any order.
You can do them in any order.
Mm-hmm.
And Nintendo's still figuring it out open world. This really isn't like the best open world example. Like if you had to show someone how an open world game should play out, it probably shouldn't be Breath of the Wild. In terms of mechanically, the world itself is beautiful. I'm just talking about how like they set up dungeons and how the story progresses. Not necessarily the best way to handle it. I always go back to something like The Witcher or Skyrim and how they handle open world, is to have some sort of linearity for story's sake, but also have you can do whatever you want whenever you want. But that's just where I'd be a little concerned, is if they forced the player to get into a dungeon where they were required to have certain aspects already, like prerequisites already filled. I don't know how they would check that box off there.
Yeah, I think any prerequisites that you would need would have to be available like in this DLC. Like they'd be created for the DLC. Now that we're talking about it, like using Rivali's Gale as an example would be cool, but like using, I don't know, let's say like Rivali's Gust, it's an item that you pick up and it can make doors explode or something like that. Like if that's available in the DLC and there's 4 of them for each champion, then maybe that makes sense to do the dungeon that way instead. But now that we've talked about it, like the champion's powers wouldn't necessarily lend themselves very well to the nature of the dungeon, kind of based on how Breath of the Wild progresses. But I think just like something that you need that like representation of each champion to beat the dungeon would be kind of what I was getting at.
Well, and the thing is too is man, my head is really itchy. That none of the items or none of the powers that you get, I guess, from the champions are essential to doing anything in the game.
Mm-hmm.
So the reward you get is more along the lines of a helpful bonus, as opposed to say, oh, I want to be able to get to X, and the only way to do that is if I have Rivali's Gale. And while Rivali's Gale makes climbing up mountains and getting to places a lot easier, there's no place that's blocked off because you don't have that. Similarly, with the other 3 powers, they don't really have a mechanic that influences the world or lets you get to a certain place.
While we're on the subject, let me cut in really quick because this just popped in my head. Which champion ability did you find most useful to least useful in order of most to least?
I mean, honestly, I guess Rivali's Gale was the most useful for me, especially early on when I was still going through all the shrines and looking for the orbs to up my stamina because I couldn't climb up a lot of mountains really quickly. So I just Rivali's Gale up some really tall places. Like if I wanted to get into the Colosseum and I wanted to start from the top, work my way down, I just Rivali's Gale up there and climb up the rest of the way. Mipha's Grace was probably the second best one. Urbosa's Fury, and then Daruk's Protection. I just in Breath of the Wild, I tried to get hit as the least amount as possible. So it always caught me off guard whenever his protection was activated because I was like, whoa, I was not expecting that because I'm trying to dodge and trying to get a rush attack or something like that. So I don't know. Not that it wasn't super useful, or that he wasn't.
I never
super
really
useful,
found it useful except for the battle with Calamity Ganon at the end because I could not dodge him for the life of me the first time that I battled him. Yeah, I don't know. I would say Mipha's Grace and then Rivali's Gale for me at 1 and 2, and then coin toss for the remainder. I didn't use the protection or the Fury very often at all. So
well, it was another one of those things. I never thought about Urbosa's Fury whenever I'd be charging up my sword or whatever weapon I had, and so automatically it would just happen, and I was like, oh, I didn't mean to do that at all. And I guess the problem with that is there really was no reward for beating the dungeons that helped you in the world at all. Like I said, they were bonuses. They were things that you could use. They were beneficial to a certain extent, but it wasn't something okay, well, if you want 100% the game, which you'd have to go through the dungeons anyway to 100% the game. If you wanted to 100% the game, then you have to do, let's say, Rivali's, dungeon or Divine Beast in order to get whatever weapon or item or power he has so that you can go on and, get to X, Y, and Z and get these items. And that would just have made a little bit more sense and more of a, sense of reward whenever you beat the dungeons. And so I go back to with such a non-essential part of the game and of the gameplay experience, I don't know how they would be able to work that in unless, like you said, they introduce items that are unique to the DLC, or they introduce a new save file where you're automatically expected to have done all this stuff.
I can't see the file where you're expected to have a completion rate of a certain percentage. So I would imagine if they're going to do something like that, it'd have to be new items or something like that. But I don't know. I hope that I just kind of hope for something more than, because when you went into the Divine Beasts, right, it was just Urbosa was oh, this guy beat me 100 years ago, watch out, So I just want a little bit more from the champions other than them telling you that and then saying great, there's only 3 switches left now, 2 left now, 1, you're almost there, So
I think
I don't know.
We've talked about that in the past about the dungeons being kind of just underwhelming.
And this isn't even to say anything about the dungeon's design, just in terms of the story, how much input the champions had on your progressing through the dungeons. Like a good example would be let's see, the kind of interaction that I would kind of be hoping for with the champions is similar to Ritu and Jabba Jabba's Belly. Something that or any of the ones in Wind Waker, where you need your Errol and
what would have been a good way to handle this is if when you got into the Divine Beast and they were okay, well, theoretically each Divine Beast had something that only like the attribute that they had could only be applied to that champion. So it would make sense in Rivali's Divine Beast if you needed Rivali's Gale from the outset. Like you got these abilities when you started the Divine Beasts dungeons, so you would use them to go throughout the dungeon, and that would have made it a little bit more. Oh, I understand the necessity for this now.
Right. You'd have to change the abilities, of course, because then Mipha's Grace and Drig's Protection wouldn't be...
Yeah. I know. You'd have to change that in a way.
I like that, though. Like, I like what you're saying about it. It makes it a little bit more, personalized.
Like, oh, wow, you need to get through the dungeon, but the only way to do that is if you have this ability that you can use later on in the world.
Yeah.
So...
I don't know. I'm hoping for something cool like that, and I'm curious to see like what the dungeon itself is going to be, because like I said, there's only 4 Divine Beasts, so... I'm really looking forward to it. I still haven't bought the first pack of DLC because like extra boss battles and stuff don't really do it for me. But I'm definitely going to buy this one like the day it comes out.
Yeah,
and then I can finally finish all the Korok seeds with my little Korok mask.
Oh boy, yeah. I don't even know if I'm going to go back and touch that.
Or maybe I won't. I don't know. I don't know if I'm dedicated enough for that.
Let's talk about. One of the things I wanted to talk about is Nintendo's approach to marketing and how it's changed and how they've kind of had this weird like roller coaster since 2006. So in 2006, we saw the Wii, and that had probably one of the most memorable ad campaigns, the We Would Like to Play thing, where those 2 Japanese men would show up at people's doors and play Wii Bowling or Wii Sports or whatever.
Yeah.
And everybody remembers that. Like that was one of the ways that they really marketed the Wii very, very, very well. And then, what was it, 2012, 2013 when the Wii U came out? Marketing just kind of stopped. And it was just not good. And so you saw...
From day one, it was confusion. If this was even a new console, if it was an add-on, like...
Well, from E3, the first thing that they showed whenever they revealed the Wii U was just the gamepad. You didn't see the actual console. And so there was really no clear messaging there. So then kind of fast forward to now where you have the Switch and you have Breath of the Wild, and then had that marketing campaign behind that. They even got a Super Bowl spot. Which was huge.
And you know what I hated at first, but now like I love is that whenever you see the Switch logo, it's that little snap that goes with it. Yeah. You know, I think it's so cheesy, but at least it sticks in your head with the Switch.
Well, yeah, it's something memorable, and that's what the Wii had, was the hook. Like we would like to play, and the Switch has this snap, like the Switch sound, and so they have something that you associate it with when you think about it. When you think about the ad campaign. And it's interesting to see that they've learned from it, but it's weird because I don't know if you can actually say that they've learned from it. Because what you have is, under Satoru Iwata's direction, the Wii into the Wii U, and then under Kamishima's direction, the Switch. So it could be argued that Nintendo has learned how to market better, or it could be learned that because of the new staff and because of the way that they're handling things, you know, their way of doing it's different, and so we're seeing vastly different marketing strategies. And
I'm going to take a cop out here and say the answer is both. Nintendo has learned how to market better, and Nintendo has taken a step backwards, and I'll tell you why. I went into Spencer's today, which is like a store that sells... I don't know if you have this in the States. It's a store that sells... okay. So, you know, I went into Spencer's today. I'm looking at hats. I'm looking in, like, there's all these Pokemon hats. There's all these Mario hats. There's tons of Zelda hats, right? And I'm looking around, and I'm like, you know what? If they had a Metroid hat, I would buy it, like, right now. But they don't. So I go into EB next door. I'm looking at all the Zelda accessories. There's tons of them. I'm looking at the Mario plushies and like the Splatoon shirts that they have over there. And I was like, if they had a Metroid shirt, I'd probably buy it, but they don't. So Nintendo is really great. They've realized certain series of theirs, the marketing potential. Like before before probably, I don't know, let's be generous and say before, right around the time when the Wii and Twilight Princess came out, you would never see Zelda stuff anywhere, right? Like, people wouldn't know, what a Triforce was if you asked them, or the logo, or have any idea what it was. Now you see Zelda paraphernalia everywhere. Zelda's licensed on everything.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And then that's really taken off in the last couple of years. And, like, you can kind of see Splatoon going in the same way because there's a lot more Splatoon licensed stuff out there.
Well, and their ad campaign behind that was insane, too.
Yeah.
Like, the ads on TV and then having the game buses or whatever it is, the game vans drive around and have Splatoon there to play before it came out.
Just recently, ARMS. The campaign behind that was really good. It was really strong. There's a lot of... ARMS events going on. I've seen a couple demos even in my town set up where people can play it. So,
well, here's the thing though that you're seeing is that these games have an identity. So we've gotten to the point with Zelda where we know basically what it is. You may not be able to put it into words, but you see a game and you're like, oh, that looks like Zelda, or it looks like it has Zelda styling. You good?
Sorry, everybody. I'm just dying over here. Please continue.
But you see the Zelda style, you see the Zelda gameplay, and you're like, oh, that's Zelda. And so it has that specific identity. And you see Mario, and oh, well, that's Mario because of the gameplay, because it's a platformer, whether it's 3D or 2D. And then you see, Splatoon. Oh, it's a first-person shooter. Cartoon shooter. So we know what that is. We know how to market that. We see ARMS. It's a third-person 3D fighter. So we know how to market that. The problem is, with Metroid, like you're saying, is...
They don't understand what they have.
Well, they don't understand. I don't think they know what it is.
Exactly.
And that's the problem that you're running into, is because Metroid's always existed in two sections now, or it hasn't always, but ever since the jump to Prime, it's existed in two separate sections. So you have the side-scroller Metroidvania that gave the credence to the name, but then you also have the Metroid Prime first-person shooter, and
which is still, for all intents and purposes, a Metroidvania, just a different perspective.
It's just a different perspective.
I agree with you, though. It's like Nintendo, and this is what I think they're very good with marketing, because they know how to market. They're proven winners, and they know how to market things that they understand. Like Splatoon is a cutesy game that appeals to children, but also can appeal to older parents or gamers or people who grew up with Nintendo, because the gameplay is solid and they know how to market that. What they don't know how to do is market something like Metroid, or even some of the games that we were talking about last week that they haven't made in a long time.
Earthbound. Like how would Nintendo go about marketing Earthbound?
And it's unfortunate because Metroid doesn't fit the typical Nintendo demographic, which is like young families and maybe their parents or something like that. What it does fit, though, the demographic that it does fit, is all of the people that play the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One and have games like The Evil Within or like Wolfenstein on there. Like those kind of games are popular with a wide demographic, and Metroid would be popular with that too. I have no doubt if Metroid was on another platform, it would sell like hotcakes. But Nintendo just doesn't really know how to get behind it, which sucks. So
Metroid Metroid could have been Microsoft's answer to Halo if they pushed it more and kept putting resources into it. In terms of when it jumped to the first person perspective and the 3D.
It is baffling to see the ad campaign behind Metroid Prime, the first one, which was like amazing, and then Metroid Prime sold well because of that. And then like just the falling off a cliff ad campaign, or lack thereof, for Metroid Prime 2. Like, I kid you not, the commercial for Metroid Prime 2 is like this super solemn, serious, like commercial where two people are talking about addiction, and you're like, oh my god, is this for like a rehab center or something? and the end of the commercial, it's like, Metroid Prime 2 echoes, don't let your friends get addicted, or something like that. It's 30 seconds, there's zero footage of any Metroid game, and it's completely off-putting, and you're like, what the Who made this? Who signed off on this? Come on.
Yeah, it's Nintendo. They have hits and misses with their marketing, and you can even look at the original Majora's Mask marketing campaign and just be like, that was like incredibly dark. Mm-hmm. Like there were real people watching the world about to end saying, Link, you're our only hope, and it's like, you have 3 days. It's like before the world ends. That's an incredibly dark ad.
Yeah.
Like if you go back and look up the videos for it, it's not like a happy, cheerful, upbeat thing.
And I think at the end, like the world ended or something like that in that commercial. That was an intense commercial.
And so it's interesting to see how they approach some of this stuff. But I think in recent years, well, not necessarily recent years, but in the past, I say decade or half a decade, Nintendo's become a lot more selective of how their IP's been used, and how it's being viewed. So they cultivate, and we've seen this when they answer why they shut down certain games, is because there's a certain vision that they have for games and a certain way that they see their IPs, and they're going to make sure that that's the only vision you see. So when you look at Pokemon, and then you see somebody's fan creation of Pokemon that's picked up a lot of traction, but there's, cursing or violence in it, they're going to be like, no, we're shutting that down because that's not Pokemon. That's not what we make it to be. And so I understand. I don't necessarily like it, but I understand why they do that. But it just comes down to a question of why they market or don't market certain things the way that they do or don't. I guess we kind of talked about that now, but yeah.
Nintendo's almost like that teacher teaching a classroom full of kids, and all their IPs are their kids. And Nintendo definitely has their favorites. You know what I mean? the kids that they like the best, and then there's the kids that they tolerate, and then there's the kids that get detention all the time, and those kids would be like Metroid and Kid Icarus and Earthbound and stuff like that are held after class or something. You know what I mean? So. Yeah. So yeah, that's why on one hand, I think that they've done a great job in the last couple of years, because I've never seen more Nintendo stuff in my life than I have the last couple of years, like on T-shirts, on lunchboxes, and just stuff everywhere. But it's only some Nintendo stuff. It's not everything. Like I've never seen a Star Fox T-shirt. I've never seen a Metroid hat or just something like that.
And it's interesting because you think if any place was going to have like a Metroid hat, it'd be like Hot Topic or Spencer's.
Yeah, exactly.
Like if you had to pick one place to market that to like a really hardcore grungy like type of people, Spencer's or Hot Topic. There you go.
And even like last month, I think it was, Spencer's had that exclusive Dark Link lineup. They had like hats, T-shirts, that whole shebang. So.
It's just weird. Like I said, I just don't think that they really know. Like, they don't have a clear concept of what exactly Metroid is. And therefore, they don't know how to market it. So, if I had a product that I was wanting to sell, and over the years it's had some changes to it, not so that much that it's imperceptible, but that you could definitely say, okay, this isn't really what we had at the beginning. We like it, but it's not what we had at the beginning. And then there's a few different versions of it going around, and they're all your versions. And so, but you don't really know how to market it. Like, do you market it as, a 3D first-person shooter, or do you market it as a 2D side-scrolling Castlevania, Metroidvania type of game? Because right now, that's kind of what they're running into, releasing Metroid Returns. Or Samus Returns.
I don't think that they understand the tone of Metroid, and because they, with all those other games, they have that cutesy kind of tongue-in-cheek tone that goes with it. The thing that does give me hope is the Breath of the Wild trailer that they showed at the Switch event in January, because that was just the most pitch-perfect trailer I've seen them make probably since Twilight Princess. So. If they can just do that with Metroid Prime 4 and have a trailer like that, straight to the point, you know what it is, it's serious, it generates excitement, that's what Metroid needs. It's just something to heat it up and get the train rolling again, because the train has been, stuck in the cold for almost a decade now.
So let's talk about Metroid Prime 4 then. What we want to see in it, what our hopes for. I actually went back. I have on my Wii U the Metroid Prime trilogy when they re-released that on the eShop, and I've been playing through, or I was playing through 2, Metroid Prime 2, and then I stopped. 3 is actually my favorite.
3 is awesome.
3 is probably my favorite to play through, and my problem with 2 is that I loved 100% that one. So I go through it and actively try to 100% that game.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why. I don't know why it's that specific one. I think it's because I did it once and then I got like 99% and then I missed an item, and so now it's just a constant compulsion.
I really like all 3 Metroid Primes. Definitely Prime 1 is my favorite, just for, sentimental reasons. Prime 3 is amazing. If I had to pick my least, I'd probably say Prime 2, just because you use ammo, which I'm like not super down with, but even Prime 2 is awesome.
3 is probably my favorite Metroid Prime game. Elysium, I think that's what it's called, the really bright cloud city. I just enjoy being there.
Oh, it's a change of tone on your grapple, roller coaster.
And it's interesting in that how such a bright area and like a really bright tone can still feel really eerie and creepy in a Metroid game, in a Metroid Prime game. And that was the perfect balance of like, oh, we can make a completely bright area where there's sun shining and you can see, creatures flying. Some of them are friendly. Some of them are just birds. Mm-hmm. Some of them are, enemies. You can see all these things going around, but you still are creeped out and you still are on edge because of it. But aside from that, also Metroid Prime 3 had a lot of voice acting,
yes,
which was kind of new, because as far as I can look back, 2 and 1 didn't have voice acting in them.
No, they were strictly text.
And in 3, you had all of the other hunters were voice acted. You had the computer that talked to Samus was voiced by someone. The generals, so you had these characters that were not necessarily developed, but you had them voiced and talk, and they would talk to you. And that was something
more
that you didn't really
realistic,
see.
And you connect with them more just on the principle that they have voices and you're not reading text.
Well, and I look back on that game, and it wasn't weird to me to hear them talk. I was like, oh, this is natural. Mm-hmm. This feels like something natural. And I'm still not necessarily a fan of a silent protagonist, and I think at the very end of the game, Samus talks and gives a rundown of what happened. But it's still weird watching her in a situation where people are talking to her and she's not talking back. But regardless, one of the things I guess is a prerequisite for me now with Metroid Prime 4 is a voice-acted cast, or
yes,
voice cast. Say what you will about Metroid... not Federation Force, Metroid Other M, but it did have a full voice cast. There was not a line of dialogue in there that wasn't voiced, as far as I can remember. It was very cinematic, and I loved that about that game. I loved being able to hear characters, panic or frustration or their tone of excitement or whatever was going on. I liked being able to hear that in characters. And going back into another Metroid game where we don't have that, it's going to be a little weird.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it needs to go a step further than Breath of the Wild and have every single voice that you hear in Metroid needs to be actually voiced. Keep the scanning as a text. That's fine, but there should be comparatively way less people in a Metroid game versus a Zelda game. So there's no reason why those people shouldn't have voices. One of the reasons that Breath of the Wild trailer was so impactful was because it had the awesome narration and the awesome clips, and you heard the Great Deku Tree and then the old lady Impa telling the story of Calamity Ganon, and that. Those are the things that just make take your game to that next level, and they're easy, simple things. So yeah, it's
whenever I guess this is my biggest problem with JRPGs. Just the way that the genre plays out is that there are, there's two basically two types of cutscenes in general. Sometimes they actually have fully animated, like anime cutscenes. But I'll, go to Xenoblade Chronicles X or even more recently Persona 5. They'll have certain scenes that are completely voice acted, and then some of them that are just text boxes.
Mm-hmm.
And you can tell when one's going to be one or the other, but it kind of breaks that immersion away. And so that's one of the things that I really hope that they don't do in Metroid, because Metroid's such a cinematic property for Nintendo, in the fact that the way that it plays out and the way that, even with
that
Metroid
game uses atmosphere far more than any other Nintendo game.
And everything that, from music to the voices to just the overall colors, like all those things blend in to make a different atmosphere for the game, especially in Metroid Prime 3. Like that's just going back to it. That had the perfect blend of all those to me. People might disagree. I think that was probably the perfect Metroid Prime game, just because of all the stuff that it had and the way that it all played out. But in Metroid Prime 4, I guess the thing that we talked about before, you and me, is where is the story going to go? And while we have talked about it possibly being like a placeholder, and I'm like, oh, it's not necessarily going to be a Prime game, I feel like they wouldn't say Metroid Prime 4 if it wasn't going to be in the same storyline. And that's what confuses me, because at the end of 3, unless it's like a prequel, unless it's something we haven't seen before and they're like, we're retconning Other M and this is the beginning to the series.
I don't think so. I think this is where I disagree with you. I think when they say Metroid Prime 4, what they're really saying is it's going to play like Metroid Prime 1 through 3, and it's not going to play like Other M, so you can expect like the first-person adventure versus like a continuation of the story. If it was a continuation of the story, I'm down with that. Honestly, like the story itself in a Metroid game doesn't matter to me a whole lot so much as the atmosphere and everything else going on. But one of my big hopes for this game is that they create a villain for Samus, like that perfect foil for Samus, because Metroid's had some good villains, but I don't think that it's just ever had that force of nature villain that was like could go head to head with Samus in a way that's just like, damn, like this is the Joker to Samus's Batman. Like Ridley is almost it. Dark Samus was almost it, but I don't know. And maybe you guys will disagree with me, but I feel like they're just like a notch below where Samus is. And maybe that's because Ridley's never been the final boss in a Metroid game, save for Zero Mission, but I don't know.
For me, I think I look at it like, not necessarily comparing it to Batman and the Joker, because I don't think that that's an apt comparison. But I compare Dark Samus as a foil to Samus in the way that you'd compare Link and maybe Ganondorf, in the fact that they are polar opposites of each other. And that the way that they like.
I guess the only thing holding me back from agreeing with you is that like Dark Samus is more of like a creature versus like a character. You know what I mean?
True. Yeah.
Like she was close. Like, visually, absolutely. Like the two of them squaring off like was amazing. But I don't know. She just says maybe it's just because she didn't have any dialogue or anything like that.
Yeah.
And maybe that's Ridley's problem too, actually, when I'm thinking about it now. But they just don't. I don't know. It just doesn't feel like that. Like epic counterpart to Samus.
Yeah, and I mean, I see where you're coming from. Like, I'm just trying to think of like an apt comparison, because they're rivals, but like they go further than Link and Dark Link.
Mm-hmm.
Because
absolutely.
Dark Link was like like the mirror of Link, wasn't necessarily like, oh my gosh, this is definitely like the ultimate enemy that I'm facing right now. It's like this is just a mini boss, and in Ocarina of Time, in Adventure of Link, he's the final boss. But you can, I mean, even then, you could say Adventure of Link. So I guess you could say, okay, the Adventure of Link version of Shadow Link is like Dark Samus. Because while they're not necessarily their own character, Dark Link was Ganon, and Dark Samus was Metroid Prime. And spoiler alert, sorry, if anybody has never played or heard of any of this stuff before. Oops. And so I can see that comparison there, and in the fact that this is like a tough enemy, like you're saying, but it's not necessarily like this is the antithesis to everything that I am as a person.
Yeah.
So
I don't really know like what I'm looking for in that sense. I just know that like the other guys have come close, but they never quite got there for me with Samus. I mean, it's just because I love Samus so much that like I just want like the perfect like foil for her. But
well, the difficulty is nailing down who Samus is and figuring out a foil for Samus, because in some games, you know, she's this hardcore badass bounty hunter. In Other M, she's not really.
Let's just take Other M off the table, because I think that's what I think when they say Metroid Prime 4, that's what they're really doing, is saying like we know we messed up with Other M. Like Samus isn't this whiny derpy teenager; she's badass. So
well, no, and that's what I'm saying. Like she has a character, but is not characterized enough to the point where you're like, okay, I know her personality in the way that. Well, you know, she's courageous, but she's also stubborn and headstrong. So obviously she's... And
like, I respect what Other M tried to do. It's just that it didn't do it well, you know? And it tried to build up Samus. It tried to build up Ridley. It had a lot of, like, good ideas and principle, but just in execution, it just made me feel... It made me feel like they had cheapened Samus in my eyes, which is why I just don't like that game so much.
Yeah, I mean,
the
overall,
story so much. Actually, the game itself is fine, but
I mean, I'd agree that the game itself was fine. I just didn't really like the first-person parts. They broke the flow of the game.
Well, and your Wiimote juggling, you're holding it and then twisting it. It was like a bop it. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, you couldn't actually move when you were in first-person mode. It was just ridiculous. But that's why I look at Metroid Other M not necessarily as a staple for Metroid series, but like they had full voice acting. It had fully rendered cutscenes. Like that's the kind of stuff I want to see in Metroid Prime 4.
Yeah.
I want to see these fully rendered cutscenes with, you know, everybody's talking, like there's not a single line of dialogue where where there's like voiceless text. And even if you look at Metroid Prime or Metroid Other M, there isn't a cutscene in that game that isn't a fully animated cutscene. It was a very cinematic game. And I'd love to see that in Metroid Prime 4.
Yeah, so and I agree. Like a lot of what Metroid Other M tried to do, were principally sound ideas. So take those sound ideas, but just execute excellently, you know, instead of what Other M did. So we kind of come to we know what we want it to be. Like we want it to be a first person. Like Metroid Prime 1, 2, and 3, in the way that it plays out, you go finding items. I do want to throw something out there, which is on my wish list for Metroid Prime 4. And that's something that I just thought about a couple minutes ago. But in Metroid Prime 2 and 3, you had the ability to get the screw attack and to wall jump. And while it was kind of neat, they didn't feel...
That was the hardest thing to do in those games. It was just
it just felt so out of place, and it felt very, very forced. Like they were in there just for the sake of having them in there, rather than they added anything. Because let's be honest, you had to go out of your way to find the two walls that went like this to actually wall jump, right?
It wasn't the specific ways that they looked.
It wasn't very useful to have it because there weren't very many places that actually required it. And I know wall jumping,
but they were forced.
Yeah, they were forced. Like they didn't need to be there. You could have easily just had a platform here, here, and here. But I don't know. Those are definitely staples of the Metroid franchise. But like if it's gonna feel forced and it's gonna feel weird, like maybe it's just best to leave them in the 2D world, you know?
Or if you can figure out a way to bring them into the 3D world without having that as a problem, then that'd be great. And I think the difficulty would be when you were doing the screw jump or the screw attack in the Metroid Prime series. Like basically you had to be straight ahead, staring at the wall at a perfect 180. You could be looking to the side, or you jump to the side, and you had to be running at the same time. And so many times you just run, bounce off the wall, bounce into the wall, bounce away from the wall. And so it was just difficult. I guess this is the worst thing you could compare this to. But if you had a homing attack like in Sonic, where it locked onto the wall when you did it, and you'd bounce off from there.
What about this? What about the motion that you get when you turn into the morph ball is pretty flawless, right? And then when you're in the morph ball itself, that feels fluent and natural. What if you had another way, and when you go into screw attack, you did the same morph ball animation, but now you're in the screw attack, and instead of the A button being responsible for placing bombs, that's your jump, so you can just jump around, I don't know, something like that. But that might feel more natural. Anything, but
it would be more just not necessarily a quick time event, but you'd land on it and be time it to press A, and then time it to press A, or whatever button it is, in just a way that, again, I'd like to see it more along the lines of, I hate comparing Metroid to Sonic because that's just the worst thing you could do. But have a homing attack where you lock on to that specific part, and there's not necessarily room for error, but you have to time it right, and you have to get it to work right, and you don't risk all these other factors. Excuse me, all these other factors that could ruin the mechanic. Just because that's I look back on playing with the screw attack and accidentally be facing 1 degree right, and I'd bounce straight into the wall, or I'd bounce off the wall and off into a pit, and it'd just be oh, are you kidding me? So I agree, there are certain things that don't necessarily translate well at the moment, but if they could figure out how to translate them into a 3D space,
absolutely,
that would definitely be favorable. I mean, like you said,
I
there are certain things that are
someone
staples.
say, when Metroid Prime came out, it was on a message board somewhere, oh, no screw attack in a Metroid game is no Master Sword in a Zelda game, which is totally not on the same level at all. So if they needed to leave it out, I'd rather them do that, and then until they could find a way to perfect it and bring it in, rather than just have it there just for this weird long jump that you need to make, or these awkward straight up and down hallways,
Well, and it doesn't make sense too. It's just another way to travel, and it's more of a hindrance than anything else, because you've already got the spider ball, so you just grapple on with the morph ball, and it's like I said, like you said, like we both said, it's better to have it in a 3D space if they can make it work in a 3D space, rather than force it to work in a 3D space, because that's not always going to translate well.
Yeah, well, and you don't want people to think that that have never played a Metroid game before that oh, this power up called the screw attack sucks,
Well, even when you look at the translation from top down Zelda games to 3D Zelda games, the way that certain things work are they work a bit different than they would in a 3D Zelda game, in a 2D Zelda game. The hook shot, and the not necessarily the boomerang, but the way that they're implemented in 3D is functionally similar, but mechanically different. And that's basically what you need to do when translating any game from 2D to 3D. And that's what they need to do with Metroid mechanics, is have them functionally similar but mechanically different, and not try to do a 1-to-1 comparison to it.
I agree. I replayed Super Metroid a couple weeks ago, and even playing that game, the space jump isn't even all that great. So I could live without the screw attack if they needed to. But no, I agree. If you can do it, then awesome. If you can't do it awesomely, then don't do it.
Yeah, and again, we have no idea. We don't have any idea of anything about this game,
other than the logo.
Yeah,
I kind of hope it's called something else other than Metroid Prime 4, actually. I hope it's Metroid Prime something,
Rebirth.
So, yeah, that'd be cool.
Afterbirth. Just a Binding of Isaac.
Just don't give it a Kingdom Hearts title or something like that. Those are pretty ridiculous.
Metroid Prime 4.5 by 5.
Yeah. 3 morph balls and a half. Like.
Yeah, hopefully. We're not there yet. I could see Xenoblade getting to that point, but not Metroid.
Yeah.
We're already at that point. Like, I don't understand the naming mechanics of Xenoblade.
Xenoblade 2018.
Xenoblade Chronicles X, Xenoblade Chronicles 2. All right. You know?
Yeah.
What are they going to do when they get to 10? Just 10 or X? No more Roman numerals.
Maybe it'll be 10/X. 10X.
Over 2, birth by sleep.
Oof.
Dream drop distance. All right. I think that's it for this week.
Cool.
Sorry we didn't have one last week, but we got one this week.
We had Spider-Man last week, so...
That's true. Yeah.
Sorry, everybody.
You got to, priorities.
Mm-hmm.
All right. See you guys next week.
Later, everybody.